So, astronauts always have a lot of work to do. They deal with breakdowns on the ship, go into outer space to repair something, conduct experiments, keep daily records, report about everything to the center of the Earth, and sometimes meet unknown mysterious things from outer space. Let's see which ones. So, you're alone in a small spaceship. You have our big planet on one side and the boundless black space on the other. You're checking instruments, doing some astronaut things, when you hear a strange knock. Someone or something is knocking on your ship. You realize that this is impossible, but then the knocking repeats. You look out of the porthole window, but don't see anyone. Then you report the incident to the dispatcher on the ground. No one knows what it could be. You've been training your stress tolerance and psyche for many years, but now you're a little nervous. Astronaut Yang Liwei first heard a mysterious knocking sound in 2003 when he was inside a small spacecraft as part of the first Chinese space mission. Yang said the sound was like hitting an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. He also noticed that the knock came neither from the outside of the ship nor from the inside. He couldn't determine its source. When Yang returned to Earth, he tried to reproduce the knock so that experts could discover its nature. But no one managed to find out what it was. A similar story repeated itself with other Chinese astronauts in 2005 and 2008. Yang's colleagues suggested that the ship could make the sound due to the hull's expansion or compression. The temperature inside the ship was very different from the temperature in outer space, and this could cause the metal hull to make a sound similar to a knock. Hey, don't knock it. Another mysterious sound was heard by NASA astronauts on Apollo 10 while orbiting the Moon. It was a strange whistle of unknown origin. One of the astronauts described it as cosmic music. The information about this incident was classified for a long time, but recently NASA has explained the mystery. The whistling sound was just some radio interference. But it doesn't mean there are no creepy sounds in space. NASA has launched many research probes into the boundless depths of space. One probe recorded the sounds of Jupiter, another the sounds of Saturn. The third probe recorded dust particles and small rocks crashing into the ship. Technically, these are not sounds because sound waves cannot exist in space. The ships recorded radio emissions from various objects, and then scientists transformed these waves into sounds. And the coolest thing is that you can find all this on the internet. There were many rumors and legends about Neil Armstrong and his landing on the Moon. One of the most popular myths tells how the astronaut saw strange spaceships on the Moon. The astronaut never commented on this case, and his testimony and the data he gave to the communication center on Earth was classified. But, according to the legend, Armstrong said creepy words when he was on the Earth satellite and saw something. "These babies were huge, sir. Enormous. You wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here, lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the Moon watching us." After that, he returned to the spaceship and flew to Earth. Yep, that smells like an urban legend for sure. In 2005, the commander of the International Space Station, Leroy Chiao, saw strange lights during a spacewalk. He described them as a set of white lights that rose from Earth and passed through him. His colleagues reported that it could have been an optical illusion caused by many fishing boats with searchlights along the coast of South America. Leroy saw the lights from the boats refracting and passing through his helmet. He doubted this version because he was at an altitude of 230 miles and the boats had to have some pretty powerful lights. But the astronaut was also skeptical about the extraterrestrial origin of these lights. One of the most common mysterious phenomena associated with space is glowing lights, but sometimes people notice something more material. For example, NASA astronaut Story Musgrave saw a tube that was flying in space, moving like a snake. He suggested it was a living creature from another planet or something like that. Of course, no one believed him. People assumed that the astronaut had seen some detached part from the ISS or a piece of space debris, like a hose or a tube. But the astronaut was sure that this tube had been moving like a living organism. However, the version with flying garbage sounds much more legit. During the Apollo 11 mission, astronauts reported strange light flashes in their eyes. The members of the Apollo 12 and 13 teams saw the same thing. The strangest thing was that they saw these flashes even with their eyes closed. After that, many astronauts reported seeing bright lights. They saw flashes before going to bed and in dark rooms. Some of them were bright, and some were dim and had different colors. During spacewalks, they repeated every few minutes. Scientists conducted experiments on Earth to figure out the nature of this strange phenomenon. As a result, NASA concluded that the astronauts had seen cosmic rays of an unknown nature. Researchers suggested that the particles of these rays directly affected the receptors of the retina. The astronauts' optic nerves felt the radiation, and their brains reacted to it with light flashes. During the Gemini 4 space mission, astronaut James McDivitt saw a strange geometric object in space, similar to a tin can with a pencil sticking out of it. As soon as the media found out about it, newspapers started claiming that James had seen a ship of another civilization. Then, a few years later, the astronaut refuted this theory. He saw some photos taken inside the ship and noticed the same tin can on it. It turned out that this was the reflection of some bolts in the window pane. By the way, this was one of the many times astronauts confused the details of the ship with some weird space stuff. In 1962, astronaut John Glenn was inside the Friendship 7 spacecraft when he noticed some strange things outside. They looked like tiny glowing fireflies. Glenn immediately reported this to NASA's command post. The dispatchers didn't know how to comment on this message, so the nature of the cosmic fireflies remains unsolved. But then, almost a year later, astronomers found out what it had been. At first, they thought the fireflies were pieces of metal torn off some part of the ship. But then they realized the glowing lights were droplets of frozen liquid that shifted and cracked in outer space. One of the strangest cases in the history of early space travel occurred during the mission of the Gemini 6 spacecraft on December 16, 1965. There were two astronauts, Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford, on board. They were preparing to return to Earth, but saw something strange in outer space. Wally contacted the Mission Control Center and reported he was observing an unknown object similar to a satellite. It was moving from north to south, somewhere in the polar orbit of the planet. The object was approaching them, and the astronauts could see the details. It was an unknown spaceship with a pilot dressed in a red suit. Wally heard through the radio that voices in the command center became tense. No one knew what it was and how to react to the unknown ship. Then, at that moment, they began to hear what sounded like music. Somehow, the song Jingle Bells started playing on the radio. Wally Schirra performed it on the harmonica, and the command center realized this was all a hoax. Schirra and Stafford cooked up this Christmas gag a few weeks before the flight. They wanted to cheer up their colleagues on Earth by saying they had seen Santa Claus in a spaceship. When Schirra finished the song, the guys from Earth relaxed and said it was too much. It's still one of the most famous jokes astronauts have ever played.
A shocking theory claims that mysterious comet Oumuamua might be a von Neumann probe, an alien spacecraft with broken engines tumbling through our solar system. It sounds extremely unsettling, but first things first, what is a von Neumann probe? Mathematician John von Neumann suggested the concept of self-replicating spacecraft that could in some ways mimic the features of living organisms or viruses. People started to refer to such hypothetical spacecraft as von Neumann probes. Von Neumann was sure that using self-replicating spacecraft would be the most effective way to perform large-scale mining operations, like mining asteroid belts or moons. The creators of such probes could take advantage of their exponential growth. Hypothetically, a self-replicating spaceship could be sent to a neighboring planetary system and look for raw materials there. Such materials could be extracted from moons, gas giant planets, asteroids, and the likes. Using these materials, the probe could make replicas of itself. The replicas could then be sent to other planetary systems, and the original probe could pursue its main purpose within its parent star system. This pattern sure does repeat the reproduction patterns of bacteria. That's why some experts think that von Neumann machines could be considered a form of life. There's also a theory that a self-replicating spacecraft could spread throughout a galaxy the size of the Milky Way in just 500,000 years, even if it used conventional theoretical methods of interstellar travel. In other words, it wouldn't even need to employ exotic faster-than-light propulsion. In 1981, mathematical physicist and cosmologist Frank Tipler argued that extraterrestrial intelligence couldn't exist because people had never observed von Neumann probes. Even if we take a moderate rate of replication, such probes should already be common throughout space. So, it's really weird that we haven't come across any of those yet. It might only mean that extraterrestrial intelligence doesn't exist. A response to Tipler's arguments came from astronomers Carl Sagan and William Newman. They pointed out that Tipler might have underestimated the rate of replication, and von Neumann probes should have already started consuming most of the mass in our galaxy. Therefore, any intelligent race would avoid designing von Neumann probes in the first place and try to destroy any probes as soon as they found them. Another objection to the prevalence of von Neumann probes is that civilizations that could potentially design such devices have an extremely high probability of self-destruction before producing such a machine. In any case, the assumed capacity of von Neumann probes is unlikely in reality. But then, how about Oumuamua? These days, scientists are using high-tech scanners to examine a huge, cigar-shaped comet, which might or might not be an alien probe. One idea is that it's an extraterrestrial civilization spacecraft, with broken engines wandering through our solar system. If that's the case, the object could easily be a von Neumann probe. Dr. Jason Wright from Penn State University thinks that a broken alien spaceship could move in exactly the same way as Oumuamua. Rather than moving through space like other space rocks, the 1,318-foot-long, 118-foot-wide space traveler is tumbling through the solar system. At the moment, it's traveling at a speed of around 200,000 miles per hour. In his blog, Dr. Wright says that if such derelict craft were not traveling fast enough to escape the galaxy, they could thermalize with the stars and end up drifting around like an interstellar asteroid or comet. They wouldn't have attitude control anymore and would eventually start tumbling. And it could distinguish them from regular interstellar asteroids. Plus, even though their propulsion was broken, their radio transmitters could work just fine. In any case, so far, it's just a theory, and further research is needed. What do you think? Is Oumuamua just a space rock or an alien space probe? Imagine you could travel through the universe by hitching a ride on space dust, meteoroids, comets, or even rogue planets. Wouldn't it be incredibly cool? This idea is known as panspermia. It has captivated minds for centuries, but despite its appeal, it hasn't gained much popularity among mainstream scientists. Mainly, it could be because it doesn't explain how life originated and isn't easily testable. At the same time, certain events have reignited interest in the theory, even among skeptics. And one of such events was the appearance of the mysterious Oumuamua in our solar system in 2017. Oumuamua was a mysterious object that zipped through the solar system at an astounding speed. It was the first interstellar object spotted passing through our star system and the first detected hyperbolic asteroid, an object with an orbit not bound to the sun. Observations indicated that Oumuamua was likely to be a highly elongated cigar-like object. Overall, it was a very unusual object. Scientists couldn't quite pin down what it was. Some of them suggested it was a comet, others bet it was an asteroid, and there were those who thought it might be a chunk of frozen hydrogen. In April 2020, astronomers presented a new possible scenario for the object's origin. According to one hypothesis, Oumuamua could be a fragment from a tidally disrupted planet. If true, this would make Oumuamua a rare object of a type much less abundant than most extrasolar dusty snowball comets or asteroids. What made Oumuamua especially interesting to those who support the panspermia theory is that it was a visitor from another star system, so it was possible that it could have carried life across the galaxy. The idea of panspermia advances 3 stages: escape from a planet, transit through interplanetary space, and landing on another planet. Therefore, the Oumuamua hints that panspermia is possible. Recently, a new study titled "The Implications of Oumuamua on Panspermia" has seen the light of day. It was led by David Tsao from Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, an intern at Johns Hopkins University. The study explored how many objects like Oumuamua might exist and what characteristics they would need to transport life safely across the cosmos. The researchers considered different types of space debris, such as asteroids and comets, and estimated their potential to shield life from harmful radiation, particularly gamma rays from supernovae. If these objects weren't large enough, the intense radiation would sterilize any microorganisms hitching a ride. According to their findings, space debris made of materials like nickel or silicate could provide sufficient protection. But for a passenger to survive, they would need to have a minimum size of about 21 feet. The study also tried to estimate how likely it was that extremophiles organisms that can survive in extreme environments could have been delivered to Earth in this way. They calculated that roughly 40,000 objects of at least 33 feet in diameter could have impacted Earth during its first 800 million years. While this number might sound like a lot, the chances that Earth itself was seeded by panspermia are extremely low, less than 0.001%, according to the study. Interestingly, the researchers didn't just consider Earth as a recipient of panspermia, but also as a potential source. If Earth or another habitable planet ejected life-bearing material into space, that material could, in theory, seed other planets across the galaxy. The study suggests that under optimistic conditions, up to 100,000 Earth-like planets in the Milky Way could host life as a result of panspermia. However, many factors remain uncertain. For instance, the number of rogue or free-floating planets in the galaxy could significantly affect the panspermia hypothesis. Hopefully, when we discover more about these planets and the overall density of interstellar material, we will understand more about panspermia. The scientists have also underlined that the conditions in the galaxy were different in the past. For example, during an event known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, the rate of impacts on Earth and other bodies in the solar system was 100 to 500 times higher than it is today. If similar events occurred in other star systems, the potential for panspermia would be much greater. Despite its allure, the panspermia theory remains a fringe idea in scientific circles, all because of the many unknowns and its speculative nature. But as we gather more data from projects like the upcoming Rubin Observatory's Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, which is expected to detect many more interstellar objects and rogue planets, astronomers will likely revisit and reassess this idea.
A Dyson sphere is a theoretical megaproject, a ginormous sphere encircling a star with platforms orbiting in tight formation. It's supposed to be an ultimate solution both for energy production and living space. The creators of a Dyson sphere get a lot of surface area for habitation and the ability to catch every tiny bit of solar radiation and heat produced by their central star. The first person to theorize about such a bizarre construction was British-American theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson. According to him, an intelligent extraterrestrial civilization could consider building this sphere after colonizing some moons and planets in their local stellar neighborhood. With the growth of their population, these aliens would need more and more energy to sustain their lives. Dyson calculated that assuming that this alien society grew at 1% per year, their area and energy needs would become 1 trillion times larger in a mere 3,000 years. And if their solar system contained a space body similar in size to Jupiter, they could take it apart and spread its mass in a spherical shell. by building a structure at twice the distance between our planet and the Sun. This amount of material would be sufficient to build a huge number of orbiting platforms. Each of them could be 6 to 10 feet thick, which would basically allow this civilization to live on their star-facing surfaces. A shell this thick could be comfortably habitable and capable of holding all the equipment needed for using solar radiation without falling onto the star from the inside. But after absorbing all this solar energy, the sphere would have to re-radiate it. Otherwise, the energy would build up, eventually causing the construction to melt. It means that the light of a star wrapped in a Dyson sphere would look dimmed or even completely darkened, depending on how dense the platforms orbiting it were. At the same time, it would glow unusually bright in infrared wavelengths invisible to the unaided eye. Because of this infrared radiation, Dyson spheres are classified as a type of technosignature. It's a sign of activity that astronomers can use to discover intelligent life forms in the universe. Some Earth-based researchers have infrared maps of the night sky they examine in hopes of spotting Dyson spheres. So far, no one has ever found one. However, one study has selected several Dyson sphere candidates. Its authors have processed large amounts of information using a special data pipeline for combining and analyzing information. One of the main search criteria is the detection of excessive infrared radiation. At the same time, it's important to distinguish this radiation from that emitted by natural objects. After a complicated filtering of millions of objects, the researchers identified 7 potential Dyson spheres. Sure, further analysis is needed to determine their nature. To do this, scientists want to use optical spectroscopy, which may reveal more details about these objects and their origins. At the same time, the researchers admit that these candidate Dyson spheres might have other explanations. For example, they could be debris disks or protoplanetary disks of young stars. Only more research can show whether we can find traces of other civilizations among star systems. For now, it's still an open question. Interestingly, Dyson spheres have been spoken about a lot in science fiction. As far back as 1937, a novel called Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon described systems in one particular galaxy that were surrounded by a gauze of light traps, which focused solar energy for intelligent use. That was the reason why the entire galaxy was dimmed. In another novel, Ring World, the writer spoke about a ring-shaped artificial structure surrounding a star.
Hi, my name is Martin. I am the author of this channel, and today I'll tell you all about the evidence of astronauts meeting with unidentified things at the time of observation. It's the year 1962, and American John Glenn is orbiting Earth in his Friendship 7 capsule on the Mercury Atlas 6 flight. He looks out of the window and sees fireflies.
Well, maybe those are not fireflies, but he clearly sees some weird bright specks clustered around the ship. Unsurprisingly, he tries to find a logical explanation. Can they be ice crystals from the spacecraft's hydrogen peroxide attitude control rockets? But Glenn is unable to correlate their appearance with the use of the rockets. The mystery remains unsolved.
Only much later will we find out what those fireflies were. You see, spaceships tend to accumulate clouds of debris and contamination around themselves. And when Glenn's rockets sprayed jets of crystals, many of these crystals accumulated in the cloud. They reflected sunlight and interacted with other gases, looking like tiny sparkles. The case of the mysterious fireflies is now officially solved.
But it isn't the darkest space tale. One of the most famous cases of seeing bizarre stuff in space comes from Apollo 11. That's when Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins noticed a UFO pacing along with them during their flight to the moon. That's how the astronauts described this incident. We did watch a slow blinking light some substantial distance away from us. There was something out there, close enough to be observed. The period of uncertainty was rather brief. The astronauts and ground control soon identified the object. It was one of the 4 adapter panels that fit between the 3rd stage and the lunar module. These panels were ejected from the 3rd stage, and one of them continued along the same trajectory as the lunar module with the crew. While moving, it rotated and blinked when sunlight was reflected off its surface.
Another famous and truly creepy picture hinting at the presence of alien life on the moon was taken by the crew of Apollo 16.
As the astronauts were leaving our natural satellite, they made a video. And 4 seconds of it showed a near-perfect Hollywood flying saucer leaving behind a plasma trail. For more than 30 years, enthusiasts used this video to prove that aliens had paid us a visit.
But then, scientists decided to take the matter into their own hands. They realized that, when viewed from the window through which the video had been taken, the object in the film was actually consistent with a small floodlight sticking out from the side of the capsule on a boom.
Look, from this angle, the floodlight looks exactly like a flying saucer. And the boom, indeed, looks like that plasma trail. And do you see this? Those are a couple of bolts on the boom.
Another report that inspired UFO enthusiasts came from Gemini 7. Astronauts Frank Borman and Jim Lovell were making what was called a football maneuver. It was supposed to get them into a position where they would make recurring close approaches with their Titan II booster stage every orbit.
But when they were performing this maneuver, Barman reported bogey at 10 o'clock high. We have several, looks like debris, up here, actual sighting. We also have the booster in sight. Yeah, have very, very many. Look like hundreds of little particles banked on the left out about 3 to 4 miles. It looks like a path to the vehicle at 90 degrees. They are past now. They were in polar orbit. Lovell claimed that the booster was in sight too, slowly tumbling along with the debris cloud. Does it mean that Bogman's bogey particles couldn't have been the booster or booster debris? After all, they were moving in a different direction, traveling along a different trajectory. Well, not necessarily. Later analysis showed that those particles were ice flakes from leftover fuel from the Titan II.
As you see, astronauts often report seeing weird stuff out there, but NASA's reaction is often anticlimactic. Let's have a look at how they commented on the statements of an astronaut who claimed to have witnessed alien presence in space.
NASA doesn't track UFOs. NASA is not involved in any sort of cover-up of alien life on this planet or anywhere else in the universe.
We should also remember that unidentified doesn't necessarily mean positively identified as an alien spacecraft. There's a lot of objects in orbit, and a lot of stuff travels along every mission. So, we'll always have UFO reports as long as we have space programs. Hi everyone! Today we'll be talking about the controversial music that astronauts once heard in space. A few years ago, NASA made public the recording of a bizarre music that the astronomers from Apollo 10 reported hearing in May 1969, while they were flying over the far side of the moon. At that moment, they were out of radio contact with Earth. This happened months before the first astronaut set foot on the lunar surface. There were 3 people on board: Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan. The sounds lasted for about an hour. Astronomers managed to record them and transmit them to Mission Control in Houston. Now, I want you to listen to these whistling sounds.
That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound?
Don't they resemble some kind of otherworldly outer space music? So the question is, could the astronauts have heard alien music coming from outer space? Well, there's another more simple, non-alien involving explanation for this cosmic phenomenon, but we'll talk about it a bit later. In the audio recording from the Apollo 10 mission, astronaut Eugene Cernan, who was piloting the lunar module, could be heard asking John Young, piloting the command module, if he could hear that whistling sound. Cernan was the first one to call these sounds music and to add that they were kinda outer spacey. Later, when the 2 astronauts asked Tom Stafford, who was in the lunar module with Cernan, if he could hear the sounds too, he confirmed it and stated that they were really weird. Young suggested they should find out more about them. Nobody will believe us, he added. Apollo 10 was a mission that paved the way for Apollo 11, which landed 2 humans on the lunar surface. The Apollo 10 astronauts flew to the moon in a command module. However, 2 of the crew members also had a ride in the lunar module, which allowed them to drop down to less than 10 miles above the moon's surface. So, since they managed to approach our natural satellite so closely, could they have heard something coming from the lunar surface? Well, apparently not. Turns out that the creepy whistling sound was nothing more than some interference between the VHF radios on the 2 different vehicles. Interestingly enough, Apollo 11 astronaut Michael Collins later wrote in his book, Carrying the Fire, that NASA technicians had warned him about the whistling. He also mentioned that if he hadn't known about the origins of this music, it would have scared him to no end. In 2008, NASA shared the transcripts of the Apollo 10 transmission, but according to the documents themselves, they were declassified in 1982. In 2012, NASA also shared the audio files online. If you listen to these files, you'll hear that the astronauts sound sincerely awed and puzzled by what they hear. Moreover, they bring it up over and over again. It's also worth mentioning that you never actually feel that the 3 men were panicked or alarmed while going over the transcript or the audio. Some sources put particular emphasis on the fact that the space music started when the astronauts were over the far side of the moon. They didn't have radio or visual contact with mission control for about an hour, something that had been expected. Some documentaries used this moment to create tension by saying things like, the astronauts were on their own. No one on Earth could see or hear them. However, the narrators never explained why the astronauts' isolation could have been such a significant factor. By no means was it connected to the not-so-mysterious sounds under soar. There's another interesting element to this story that we should consider though, and it's the fact that Apollo 10 astronauts never discussed this incident and these sounds publicly. However, it's still unclear whether they talked about it with NASA engineers. This makes some people speculate that the astronauts didn't want to project anything but a rock-hard psyche. Showing a drop of confidence even once during the whole mission could have left them out of the whole project.
A Dyson sphere is a theoretical megaproject, a ginormous sphere encircling a star with platforms orbiting in tight formation. It's supposed to be an ultimate solution both for energy production and living space. The creators of a Dyson sphere get a lot of surface area for habitation and the ability to catch every tiny bit of solar radiation and heat produced by their central star. The first person to theorize about such a bizarre construction was British-American theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson. According to him, an intelligent extraterrestrial civilization could consider building this sphere after colonizing some moons and planets in their local stellar neighborhood. With the growth of their population, these aliens would need more and more energy to sustain their lives. Dyson calculated that assuming that this alien society grew at 1% per year, their area and energy needs would become 1 trillion times larger in a mere 3,000 years. And if their solar system contained a space body similar in size to Jupiter, they could take it apart and spread its mass in a spherical shell by building a structure at twice the distance between our planet and the Sun. This amount of material would be sufficient to build a huge number of orbiting platforms. Each of them could be 6 to 10 feet thick, which would basically allow this civilization to live on their star-facing surfaces. A shell this thick could be comfortably habitable and capable of holding all the equipment needed for using solar radiation without falling onto the star from the inside. But after absorbing all this solar energy, the sphere would have to re-radiate it. Otherwise, the energy would build up, eventually causing the construction to melt. It means that the light of a star wrapped in a Dyson sphere would look dimmed or even completely darkened, depending on how dense the platforms orbiting it were. At the same time, it would glow unusually bright in infrared wavelengths invisible to the unaided eye. Because of this infrared radiation, Dyson spheres are classified as a type of technosignature. It's a sign of activity that astronomers can use to discover intelligent life forms in the universe. Some Earth-based researchers have infrared maps of the night sky they examine in hopes of spotting Dyson spheres. So far, no one has ever found one. However, one study has selected several Dyson sphere candidates. Its authors have processed large amounts of information using a special data pipeline for combining and analyzing information. One of the main search criteria is the detection of excessive infrared radiation. At the same time, it's important to distinguish this radiation from that emitted by natural objects. After a complicated filtering of millions of objects, the researchers identified 7 potential Dyson spheres. Sure, further analysis is needed to determine their nature. To do this, scientists want to use optical spectroscopy, which may reveal more details about these objects and their origins. At the same time, the researchers admit that these candidate Dyson spheres might have other explanations. For example, they could be debris disks or protoplanetary disks of young stars. Only more research can show whether we can find traces of other civilizations among star systems. For now, it's still an open question. Interestingly, Dyson spheres have been spoken about a lot in science fiction. As far back as 1937, a novel called Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon described systems in one particular galaxy that were surrounded by a gauze of light traps, which focused solar energy for intelligent use. That was the reason why the entire galaxy was dimmed. In another novel, Ring World, the writer spoke about a ring-shaped artificial structure surrounding a star.
It was the year 1952 when America first caught the flying saucer fever. A rash of strange sightings was reported in the skies over Washington, D.C. Were those unexplained radar blips, unidentified aircraft, or something much more outlandish? The Washington, D.C. sightings of the summer 1952 are also known as the Big Flap. But it all started in 1947 when a search and rescue pilot reported 9 saucer-like things flying like geese in a diagonal chain-like line. Their speed reportedly exceeded 1,000 miles per hour. Within mere weeks, the sightings of flying saucers were reported in 40 other states. Later, the explanations were found. The sightings were either hoaxes or misidentifications of known aircraft and natural phenomena, but a few cases remained unexplained. By 1952, the UFO investigation unit called Project Blue Book had been founded. It was led by Captain Edward Rubbold. He and his team would have continued to investigate a few dozen sightings per month, but for the April 1952 issue of Life magazine, with an eye-catching headline, "There is a case for interplanetary saucers." The article made quite a convincing case. It spoke about 10 unexplained UFO incidents, claiming that the flying objects were extraterrestrial in origin. According to the Washington Post, after the appearance of the article, the number of UFO sightings grew more than 6-fold, from 23 in March 1952 to 148 in June. By July, the UFO mania was in full swing. All that was missing was a spark. And it happened before midnight on Saturday, July 19th, 1952. An air traffic controller at Washington National Airport spotted 7 slow-moving objects on his radar screen. They were far from any civilian or military flight paths. He called his supervisor and joked about a fleet of flying saucers. Simultaneously, 2 other air traffic controllers at National spotted a bizarre bright light hovering in the distance. It suddenly dashed away at breakneck speed. At Andrews Air Force Base, located nearby, radar operators detected the same unidentified blips. Those were slow and clustered at first, but then they raced away at a speed higher than 7,000 miles per hour. One Andrews controller looked out of his tower window and spotted something he later described as an orange ball of fire with a tail. A commercial pilot flying over the Virginia and Washington, D.C. area saw 6 streaking bright lights resembling falling stars without tails. 2 jets were sent to search for the UFOs, but every time they got close to the locations shown on the radar screens, the weird blips would disappear. By dawn of July 20th, the objects were gone altogether. Ruppelt, the lead investigator of Project Blue Book, found out about the sightings just a few days later after flying to Washington, D.C. and reading news reports. He tried to get to National and Andrews to interview the radar operators and air traffic controllers, but wasn't allowed to take a government-issued car. He had to fly back to Ohio with nothing. In a few days, UFOs were back over the Capitol. The same radar blips appeared again. Radar operators were wondering whether those dozen or so objects could be caused by a temperature inversion. That's a common occurrence in DC's muggy, scorching summer months. It occurs when a layer of warm air forms in the low atmosphere. It traps cooler air beneath. In this case, radar signals can bounce off the layer at shallow angles and create an impression of near-ground objects in the sky. To be safe, 2 more aircraft were sent to chase down the unidentified targets. The jets raced to a location targeted by radar, only for the blips to disappear. Eventually, one of the plane pilots saw a bright light in the distance and gave chase. But even though he was flying at maximum speed, he didn't manage to overtake the lights. At a press conference, representatives of the Air Force offered the public some easy-to-swallow explanations, having opted for the temperature inversion theory. After that, UFO sightings dropped from 50 a day to 10.
This is the James Webb Space Telescope, and this is how far we can see through its eyes. Impressive. But let's zoom further. Further! Further! The image is getting blurrier and blurrier. Wait! What is this shadow? It's a giant telescope capable of seeing those seemingly blurry images in perfect detail. NASA's Roman telescope is to be launched in 2027, and it might help us unravel the mysteries of the universe, including the essence of dark matter. No worries, James Webb will continue to show us the beauty of the cosmos and solve mysteries one by one. But astronomers have a new mission these days. They want to deploy the next, even bigger space telescope. And this mission is already well underway. The Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope is likely to start a new age for astronomy. Scientists hope that the telescope will gather more data than any other NASA mission has ever done. Hubble and Webb are incredibly good at zooming in to get a clear, detailed view of small parts of the sky. Meanwhile, Roman is going to provide us with a much wider field of view. It will be capable of creating infrared images 200 times larger than Hubble. At the same time, it will have a similarly high level of detail. But even though the new telescope will be able to produce perfect images, it's going to be used mainly for surveys. Let's say we need to look for the star population in a nearby galaxy. But it's a too large field of view for Hubble. If we use it, we'll have to stitch lots of different shots and create mosaics out of them. But with Roman, a picture of the entire galaxy can be taken in one single shot. Look at this recent mosaic of our neighbor, the Andromeda Galaxy. This image was put together using 400 individual images taken by Hubble. And Roman will paint the same ultra-vast picture with the same level of detail with just 2 images. It not only sounds cool, it also means an unprecedented amount of data collected. Once we have such a panoramic view of the universe, NASA and other space agencies will probably be able to answer some of the greatest questions that have been intriguing humanity for ages. One of the main goals is to test the theory of relativity suggested by Albert Einstein. It's been well tested on the scale of our solar system, but not so much on larger cosmological scales. According to this theory, visible matter is supposed to slow down the expansion of the universe. But the universe is expanding non-stop, and doing it faster and faster. So, astronomers attribute this ever-growing expansion speed to a mysterious component, dark energy. They believe that it makes up around 68% of the universe. Hopefully, Roman will provide us with data that will help us accurately measure the position and distance between us and millions of galaxies. Eventually, it might let us figure out the expansion rate of the universe in different areas. In the end, the results might tell us whether Einstein's theory of gravity needs modification. One more of Roman's main goals is to detect hundreds and thousands of new exoplanets within our home Milky Way galaxy. The telescope will be able to do it using the technique known as gravitational microlensing. You see, when two stars align with each other, the one positioned in front distorts and magnifies the light of the other star located behind. And if the star in the foreground has a planet, we can see how this planet affects the light of the star behind it. Roman will hopefully count billions of stars, providing us with a very good census of how many of these stars have exoplanets. The cutting-edge telescope will not only spot new exoplanets, it will also carry another crucial instrument called a coronagraph. It can image exoplanets that are close to their parent star. This is actually an extremely tricky technique since the starlight has to be suppressed. After all, it's much brighter than the objects you want to study. By those objects, I mean nearby planets. The chronograph on the Roman telescope will try to capture large Jupiter-like planets directly by conducting live corrections to improve the quality of images. If it proves to work properly, the telescope will make a great demonstration instrument, forming the baseline for the technology that will be used on future space observatories. Such observatories will be capable of directly capturing Earth-like planets in the habitable zone of their parent stars. But the Roman Space Telescope isn't the only project that can change the way we explore space. There are other concepts, like Nautilus. It's an idea of a revolutionary space telescope based on a novel technology: special optical elements. Such elements can potentially allow us to overcome the main limitations of space telescopes: non-scalable primary mirrors. The Nautilus technology can provide large but ultra-light telescope apertures, enabling the launch of a massive fleet of identical telescopes. They will have an impressive light collecting power, which will help Nautilus survey thousands of Earth-sized planets located in the habitable zone of their stars. As a result, we might find atmospheric signatures of life on those planets. Over the past 2 billion years, the atmosphere of our planet has changed dramatically. The abundance of free molecular oxygen and ozone, which are highly reactive gases, together with water vapor and methane, represent a unique atmospheric composition. The presence of these gases, biosignatures, in the atmosphere of our planet is a sign of life that can be detected from afar. We're speaking about galactic distances here, but to identify such fingerprints of atmospheric components in the light reflected by or transmitted through the atmospheres of Earth-like planets, we need very large telescopes. NASA's Kepler mission has discovered more than 4,000 planets. And still, no existing, or even planned, space telescope has a diameter that is large enough to search for life in exoplanets' atmospheres. Finding and interpreting observations of extraterrestrial life correctly is very difficult. But the Nautilus team hopes to build a telescope capable of studying thousands of Earth-like planets. Then, there's the European Space Agency's Euclid mission. It's designed to explore the composition and evolution of the dark universe. The mission was named after Greek mathematician Euclid, who lived in Alexandria around 300 years BCE. He founded the subject of geometry, and since the density of energy and matter is tightly linked to the geometry of the universe, the mission was named in his honor. This space telescope will create a great 3D map of the large-scale structure of the universe across space and time. It'll do it by observing billions of galaxies across more than a third of the sky. Euclid will try to figure out how the universe has expanded and how its structure is formed over the course of cosmic history. Hopefully, it will reveal more about the role of gravity and the very nature of dark matter and dark energy. As we already know, dark energy likely accelerates the expansion of the universe. As for dark matter, it controls the growth of cosmic structures. But experts remain unsure about what dark energy and dark matter are. By observing the evolution of the universe over the past 10 billion years, we might finally figure out how it has been expanding and changing. From this, astronomers might infer the properties of dark energy, dark matter, and gravity. It could help find out more about their precise nature. The Euclid spacecraft is around 15 feet tall and 12 feet wide. It consists of two main components, the payload module and the service module. The payload module includes a 4-foot diameter telescope and two scientific instruments, a visible wavelength camera and a near-infrared camera, OI spectrometer. As for the service module, it contains satellite systems, such as electric power generation and distribution, data processing electronics, thermal control equipment, and so on.
The Roswell incident is a collection of events and myths surrounding the crash of a mysterious object in 1947. Right after rubber and metallic debris was recovered by Roswell Army Airfield staff, the United States Army claimed that they had their hands on a flying disc. Just a day after this announcement was made and made international headlines, it was retracted, but the word was already out. To hide the true nature of the find, the Army stated it was a good old weather balloon. But later in 1978, a retired Air Force officer revealed that it was just a cover story. At the same time, he added that he was sure that the debris had an extraterrestrial origin. This speculation became popular thanks to the 1980 book, The Roswell Incident. It also turned into the basis for long-lasting and increasingly contradictory and complex UFO conspiracy theories. Over time, they expanded the incident to include authorities hiding the evidence of other space civilizations, multiple crashed flying saucers, alien bodies, and even reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology. However, none of those theories were based on any real evidence. But despite the absence of proof, many supporters of the UFO theory claimed that the Roswell debris was from a crashed alien craft. They accused the authorities of creating cover-up stories. This conspiracy narrative became a trope in movies, science fiction literature, and TV shows. No wonder that the town of Roswell is still promoting itself as the best destination for UFO-associated tourism. But what happened in this area in reality? The government's claim that a weather balloon had crashed at Roswell was indeed a lie. In 1994, the Air Force admitted that the recovered debris had actually been from an American balloon used to watch other nations. It was part of Project Mogul, an attempt to monitor anticipated nuclear tests that could be conducted by other countries. In 1997, an Air Force report called the Roswell Report, Case Closed, suggested that all those stories about alien bodies could have come from civilian witnesses who had seen parachute crash test dummies. The report also suggested that the witnesses might have combined several different events in their memories: the Project Mogul materials, the crash of test dummies, and a few other accidents that had occurred in the area. For many supporters of the UFO theory, though, those explanations sounded like the authorities planned to cover up their interaction with extraterrestrial civilizations. After all, in 1947, the USA, as well as some other nations, was in the midst of the flying saucer craze. People reported seeing bizarre objects in the sky. They claimed those were spacecraft piloted by aliens. It was against such a hectic background that a rancher discovered some highly unusual debris near Roswell, New Mexico. The material included tinfoil, sticks, and rubber strips. The next month, he took his findings to the Roswell sheriff. The man contacted the Roswell Army Airfield. After getting the wreckage, they issued that very extraordinary press release claiming that a flying disc had been found at a local ranch. The reasons for such an outrageous statement were unclear. In any case, the Roswell Daily Record picked up this press release right away, printing the story on the 8th of July with the headline, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." That's when the military backtracked, announcing that it had been just a weather balloon carrying a radar target. That's a device that looks like a box kite made of foiled paper fastened to a balsa wood frame. The Roswell Morning Dispatch paid attention to this new claim and released a new story called "Army Debunks Roswell Flying Disc as World Simmers with Excitement."